Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, it is free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic and emotional stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us go back to our main character. The most expensive mistake an HOA can make isn't refusing to pay a bill. It's forgetting who owns the road beneath their tires. The first horn shattered the silence at exactly 6:09 on a chilly Friday morning. Its echo rolled across the still surface of Silver Creek Lake before bouncing off the pine-covered hills that surrounded the community. Another horn answered. Then another. Within minutes, the peaceful entrance to one of the most exclusive lakefront neighborhoods in the county had turned into a parking lot of frustrated homeowners, delivery trucks, landscapers, and contractors, all staring at the same motionless steel gate. The keypad wasn't flashing an error. The power wasn't out. The cameras were still sweeping slowly from side to side. The gate simply refused to open. I stood on the opposite side of the entrance with a steaming cup of black coffee warming my hands. The cool autumn air carried the clean scent of wet cedar and fresh pine needles, while a thin layer of fog drifted lazily across the lake behind me. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called across the water, completely unaware that a multi-million-dollar community was beginning to panic. Luxury SUVs stretched nearly a quarter-mile down the private access road. Chrome glistened beneath the rising sun. Boat trailers waited behind landscaping trucks. A furniture delivery company sat trapped behind a catering van that was supposed to reach a wedding reception before 8 o'clock. Nobody moved. Nobody could. Then I heard the voice I had expected before the morning had even begun. Ethan Holloway. Victoria Langford stormed toward the gate, her ivory business coat flowing behind her as expensive leather heels clicked sharply against the pavement. Her perfectly styled blonde hair barely moved despite the breeze rolling off the lake, and the expression on her face suggested she still believed this was simply another problem she could solve by raising her voice. "What have you done?" she shouted. I took one slow sip of coffee before answering. "I secured my property." Her eyes widened. "You can't block residents from their own homes." I looked toward the heavy steel gate separating us. "I didn't block anyone from their homes." I paused just long enough for everyone nearby to listen. I closed my gate. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before dozens of conversations erupted at once. "What does he mean? My remote isn't working. I've got contractors waiting. My guests are already on the highway." One homeowner climbed out of his Escalade and repeatedly pressed his remote directly against the receiver. The small red light blinked every single time. "Access denied." Victoria pointed toward me with a trembling finger. "This road belongs to the HOA." Before I could answer, another sound drifted through the morning. Gravel crunching beneath heavy tires. A county sheriff's SUV rolled slowly to the front of the line, blue emergency lights reflecting across polished vehicles and the closed steel gate. Deputy Aaron Briggs stepped out, adjusted his campaign hat, and calmly walked toward the entrance carrying a folder tucked beneath one arm. Victoria hurried to meet him. "Deputy," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I want him ordered to open this gate immediately." Briggs accepted the documents she thrust into his hands, but didn't respond right away. Instead, he opened the folder I had delivered to the sheriff's office the previous afternoon. The only sounds were idling engines, distant birds, and pages turning in the crisp morning air. Finally, he closed both folders. "Mrs. Langford," he said evenly, "this is a civil property matter." Her confident smile vanished. "He can't do this." Deputy Briggs looked directly at her. "The recorded ownership documents indicate Mr. Holloway owns this entrance, the gate system, and the private access infrastructure." Dozens of heads turned toward Victoria. Not me. Her. For the first time since becoming HOA president, every homeowner in Silver Creek Lake was looking for answers she didn't have. 24 hours earlier, she had leaned across a polished conference table, slid my $63,500 repair invoice back into my hands, and smiled as though she had already won. She believed refusing to pay would end the argument. She never imagined it would become the reason an entire lake community would discover who had actually owned the gate all along. My name is Ethan Holloway, and for as long as I can remember, Silver Creek Lake has measured time differently than the rest of the world. Seasons weren't marked by calendars. They were marked by the smell of fresh cedar after spring repairs, the sound of aluminum docks settling into the water every summer, the golden leaves collecting inside drainage channels every autumn, and the hollow crack of lake ice pushing against timber pilings every winter. My father taught me to notice those things before I ever learned multiplication. He wasn't a wealthy developer. He wasn't an attorney. He was a builder. When most people looked at the lake, they saw expensive waterfront homes, polished boats, and weekend vacations. My father saw retaining walls holding back thousands of tons of saturated earth. He saw electrical conduits buried beneath the entrance road. He saw culverts quietly carrying stormwater away before anyone noticed it had rained. Every piece of infrastructure had a purpose, even if nobody else ever thought about it. I spent nearly every childhood weekend beside him. At 7 years old, I carried bolts that were too heavy for my hands. At 10, I learned how to replace warped dock boards without leaving uneven edges. By 13, I could identify the difference between harmless surface cracking and structural failure just by running my fingertips across concrete. While my friends spent summers at baseball camps, I spent mine covered in sawdust, mud, and hydraulic oil. I wouldn't trade those memories for anything. The smell of pressure-treated lumber still reminds me of those mornings when my father would hand me a tape measure and quietly say, "Measure twice. Build once. Fix it before someone notices it's broken." That philosophy became the foundation of my life. I earned a civil engineering degree, specialized in waterfront infrastructure, and eventually returned to Silver Creek Lake to take over Holloway Infrastructure Services after my father retired. The company wasn't large, but it never needed to be. We maintained exactly what our family had built decades earlier. The private entrance road, the electronic security gate, the marina access lane, the retaining walls protecting the shoreline, the underground utility corridor serving every lakefront property, the drainage system that quietly prevented flooding after every major storm. None of it belonged to the HOA. Most homeowners never realized that. Every time they pressed a remote and watched the gate glide open, they assumed their monthly dues paid for the convenience. They didn't know my technicians inspected the motors every month. They never saw us replacing worn bearings during freezing January mornings while icy wind blew across the lake hard enough to numb our hands. They never noticed us clearing storm drains before sunrise because we'd already finished before anyone woke up. That was perfectly fine with me. Real infrastructure isn't built for applause. It's built so nobody notices it's there. Every spring, I personally walk the entire shoreline carrying a clipboard and a thermos of black coffee. The air smelled of damp earth, pine resin, and lake water warming beneath the first sunlight. Gulls circled overhead while small waves tapped rhythmically against cedar pilings. I inspected every retaining wall, every drainage grate, every electrical cabinet, and every security camera. Because ownership isn't something you announce. It's something you maintain. For nearly 20 years, that quiet arrangement worked perfectly. The homeowners enjoyed peaceful weekends. My company kept everything operating. Problems were solved long before they became emergencies. Then Victoria Langford bought one of the largest lakefront homes on the Western Shore. Within a year, she became HOA President. And almost immediately, she began confusing convenience with control. She looked at everything my father had built and saw community assets. I looked at the same road, the same gate, and the same shoreline and saw promises my family had spent 3 generations keeping. Neither of us realized then that those two very different definitions of ownership were already on a collision course. Victoria Langford's first act as HOA president was replacing the old cedar welcome sign with polished black stone and brushed steel lettering. Silver Creek Lake Community, it read, as if changing the sign changed who owned the road beneath it. The installation crew arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning. I heard the drill before I saw them. A sharp metallic whine cut through the trees while concrete dust drifted across the entrance like pale smoke. One worker had already removed the smaller plaque identifying Holloway Infrastructure Services as the gate owner. Another was measuring the stone pillar for a new bronze panel stamped with the HOA seal. I shut off the gate's maintenance circuit. The drill died instantly. The sudden silence made all 3 workers turn toward me. "Who authorized this?" I asked. The foreman handed me a work order. "Victoria Langford." I found her inside the clubhouse overlooking the western shore. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the lake behind her, and the room smelled of citrus cleaner, fresh flowers, and the expensive sandalwood perfume she wore to every board meeting. She sat at the head of a long table surrounded by folders labeled Community Enhancement Plan. She barely looked up when I entered. "You stopped my contractors. They were drilling into private infrastructure." She folded her hands. "The entrance serves the community. That doesn't make it community property." Her smile tightened. "Ethan, people have used that gate for decades, under an access agreement, which means the HOA has rights. Limited rights." She leaned back slowly, studying me the way a realtor studies a house before deciding what walls to remove. "We're modernizing Silver Creek," she said. "You should be proud your family's old system is becoming part of something larger." Old system. The phrase landed harder than it should have. My father had designed that gate to survive winter ice, summer storms, power failures, and emergency evacuations. Victoria saw weathered cedar and exposed steel. She never saw the engineering beneath it. I removed the unauthorized plaque that afternoon. The next morning, she issued the first temporary access codes without contacting me. Then came the realtors. Victoria began marketing Silver Creek as a fully managed private resort. Community. Prospective buyers arrived in black SUVs, punching codes she had created through the HOA office. They toured the marina, photographed the docks, and walked through maintenance areas clearly marked private. I canceled the codes. She created new ones. By summer, vacation rentals started appearing online. Lakefront luxury with private marina access. Exclusive gated entrance. Full use of community docks. None of that access belonged to Victoria. Every Friday evening, unfamiliar vehicles rolled through the gate carrying coolers, paddleboards, jet skis, and people who treated the shoreline like an amusement park. Boat trailers blocked the service lane. Children climbed across locked equipment platforms. One rental guest dragged a metal fire pit onto a cedar dock and left a black burn ring near the fuel station. I sent Victoria photographs. Her response contained one sentence: "Tourism supports property values." Then she organized a charity regatta without consulting me. Delivery trucks crossed the entrance road before sunrise. Portable toilets were placed beside the utility corridor. A staging company drove steel anchors into the ground directly above buried fiber lines. When I warned the crew, they showed me another HOA work order with Victoria's signature. At the emergency board meeting that evening, I placed every photograph on the table. Victoria glanced at them, then pushed the stack aside. "You're exaggerating normal community use. That road has load limits. Then improve it. The marina lane isn't designed for commercial events. Then modernize it. And who pays for that?" She smiled. "You benefit from rising property values, don't you?" That was the moment I understood the problem wasn't confusion. Victoria knew the infrastructure belonged to me. She simply believed repeated use would eventually make ownership irrelevant. To her, every boundary was temporary if she ignored it long enough. And by the time her largest event arrived, she had convinced the entire board that my family's property was theirs to use, mine to maintain, and nobody's responsibility when it finally broke. The weekend Victoria had spent months promoting arrived beneath a cloudless September sky. She called it the Silver Creek Waterfront Celebration. The glossy brochures described gourmet food trucks, live music, charity boat races, luxury home tours, and fireworks over the lake. Drone videos flooded social media for weeks beforehand, promising visitors an exclusive gated community experience unlike anywhere else in the county. One sentence appeared on every advertisement: private lakefront access included. Nobody had asked the owner of that private access. Friday afternoon, the first wave of trucks rolled through the entrance. Diesel engines echoed beneath the pine trees while the smell of hot asphalt, gasoline, and grilled barbecue drifted across the shoreline. Portable stages arrived on heavy flatbeds. Catering trailers followed behind refrigerated trucks. Forklifts bounced over the entrance road carrying steel barricades and lighting towers. I stood beside the retaining wall with a clipboard, quietly counting axle loads. Most people thought I was overreacting. Concrete never does. The entrance road had been engineered for passenger traffic, emergency vehicles, and occasional delivery trucks, not a nonstop parade of commercial equipment weighing tens of thousands of pounds. By sunset, tire marks covered both shoulders. The marina service lane had become a loading zone. One landscaping company parked directly over the underground utility corridor despite bright orange maintenance markers standing less than 10 feet away. I walked over immediately. "You can't leave that truck there." The foreman shrugged. "The HOA told us to. They don't own this corridor." He pointed toward Victoria, who was directing volunteers near the clubhouse. "Take it up with her." I did. She barely looked away from the television crew interviewing her beside the waterfront. "Ethan," she said with practiced patience, "today isn't about engineering. It will be tomorrow." She smiled toward the camera. "We're bringing prosperity to Silver Creek." Prosperity. That word lingered in my head as another loaded truck crossed the entrance bridge. Late Saturday afternoon, while a local band played beside the marina, I heard something almost nobody else noticed. Hey, dull crack. Deep. Heavy. Not loud enough to stop the music. Loud enough to stop my heartbeat. I immediately walked to the retaining wall supporting the inside curve of the entrance road. Fresh fractures. Thin as pencil lines. Running diagonally across two reinforced concrete panels. I crouched and pressed my fingertips against the surface. The crack wasn't dry. Water seeped slowly through it, carrying muddy streaks toward the drainage channel. Backfill movement. Exactly what repeated overloads create. Before I could finish documenting the damage, my maintenance supervisor called over the radio. "Ethan, we've got smoke." The words hit harder than the crack. I sprinted toward the gatehouse. The smell reached me before the building came into view. Burned insulation. Melted plastic. Inside the electrical cabinet, one of the event contractors had connected industrial lighting to a maintenance outlet feeding the gate control system. The overloaded circuit had scorched wiring inside the distribution panel before the emergency protection relay disconnected power. Black soot stained the cabinet walls. Insulation hung from copper conductors like melted ribbons. Had the protective relay failed, the entire entrance system could have caught fire. Sunday morning brought another disaster. A rental forklift reversing near the marina clipped a cedar safety barrier protecting the drainage channel. The barrier shattered beneath the impact, and the machine's rear tire dropped just far enough to crush a buried conduit carrying communication cables between the gatehouse and shoreline security cameras. 3 camera feeds disappeared instantly. Then the rain came. Not a gentle shower. A relentless overnight storm. Water rushed through the damaged drainage system faster than the compromised retaining wall could relieve the pressure. Muddy runoff poured beneath the cracked concrete, while pumps struggled to keep pace. My crew worked through darkness beneath portable floodlights, soaked to the skin, surrounded by the smell of wet earth, diesel fuel, and freshly cut timber. For 9 straight days, we stabilized slopes, replaced damaged conduit, rebuilt electrical systems, restored drainage, and reinforced the failing wall before something catastrophic happened. When the final engineering assessment landed on my desk, it filled nearly 20 pages. Photographs, structural calculations, contractor reports, electrical inspections, every damaged component traced directly to HOA-authorized activities. At the bottom sat the number that would change everything. Repair estimate, $63,500. I stared at it for a long moment before placing the report into a large envelope addressed to Victoria Langford. Even then, I still believed she would do the responsible thing. I had no idea she was about to make the single most expensive decision of her life. I arrived at the gatehouse at 5:18 the next morning, long before the first homeowner would normally leave for work. The eastern sky had only begun to fade from black to deep blue. A thin layer of mist drifted across Silver Creek Lake, carrying the clean scent of cold water, damp cedar, and fallen leaves. Somewhere beyond the shoreline, a pair of geese cut across the quiet morning, their calls echoing through the stillness before disappearing into the trees. Inside the control room, every monitor glowed softly in the darkness. Owen Keller was already there. He had maintained the electronic systems with me for nearly 12 years and knew every relay, controller, and backup circuit inside the gate better than anyone except my father. He looked up from his laptop. Everything tested twice. Emergency override. Fire department credentials remain active. EMS. Unaffected. Sheriff. Still has independent access. Exactly as planned. This wasn't about trapping people. It wasn't about creating danger. Every emergency service retained unrestricted entry. Residents already inside the community could leave normally through the exit loop sensors. The Northern County Access Road remained open for every homeowner willing to drive the longer route. Only one privilege was changing: use of my family's private entrance. At 5:37, I walked outside. The steel gate stood perfectly still beneath the security lights. Fresh rain from the previous evening still clung to the cedar fence, filling the cool air with the earthy smell of wet timber. The new notice hung neatly beside the keypad. Private access temporarily suspended. Refer to recorded property agreement. Nothing emotional. Nothing threatening. Just the truth. Back inside, Owen opened the final authorization screen. 46 active remotes. 19 temporary contractor credentials. 8 realtor access codes. 11 vacation rental permissions issued by the HOA office. Every unauthorized credential remained active for another 23 minutes. Neither of us spoke. There wasn't anything left to discuss. The documents had been reviewed. The notices had been delivered. The cure period had expired. At exactly 5:59, Owen rested his hand above the keyboard. You ready? I looked once more at the framed photograph hanging beside the equipment rack. My father stood beside the original gate nearly 30 years earlier, holding a wrench in one hand while smiling at someone standing outside the frame. Protect what you build. He never actually said those words. He lived them. Do it. The keyboard clicked once. A progress bar moved slowly across the monitor. Updating credentials. Removing expired authorizations. Synchronizing security database. 5 seconds later, a soft electronic tone echoed through the room. Access list updated. Every code issued through the HOA instantly became invalid. No sparks. No alarms. No dramatic countdown. Just a quiet confirmation that ownership had finally caught up with entitlement. At 6:06, the first SUV rolled toward the gate. A silver Lexus. The driver pressed his remote before reaching the keypad. Nothing. He tried again. The receiver flashed red. He frowned, backed up slightly, then aimed the remote directly through the windshield. Denied. At 6:09, another vehicle arrived. Then another. Within minutes, the monitors filled with expensive SUVs, contractor pickups, landscaping trailers, and delivery vans stacking neatly along the entrance road. My phone began vibrating. Victoria. Ignored. HOA office. Ignored. Unknown number. Ignored. Instead, I opened the incident log. 6:10. First failed credential. 6:12. Unauthorized keypad entry. 6:14. Attempted contractor override. Everything recorded. Automatically by the cameras. At 6:17, a landscaping truck tried following a resident who was leaving through the outbound lane. The safety barrier lowered smoothly before either vehicle crossed paths. Exactly as designed. Owen smiled without looking away from the monitors. People always assume technology is the important part. It isn't. What is? The paperwork behind it. At 6:21, a white luxury SUV accelerated past the waiting line and stopped inches from the gate. Victoria climbed out before the engine had completely stopped. Even through the security camera microphone, I could hear her heels striking the pavement. She marched directly to the keypad and entered the master code she had been using for months. The reader flashed once. Access denied. She stared at the screen. Entered it again. Access denied. Then she looked directly into the security camera. Ethan, she demanded, her voice carrying across the quiet morning. Open this gate. I pressed the intercom. The access license expired at 6 o'clock. You don't have the authority. I have the ownership. Behind her, more homeowners stepped out of their vehicles. This time, they weren't looking at me. They were looking at the woman who had promised them the HOA controlled everything. And in less than 20 minutes, the sheriff's cruiser turned into the entrance. Deputy Aaron Briggs arrived at 6:39, just as the line of vehicles reached the bend near the eastern pine grove. His cruiser moved slowly along the shoulder, blue lights reflecting across chrome bumpers and damp pavement. Engines idled beneath the trees, filling the cold air with exhaust and impatience. Somewhere near the back of the line, a child began crying. A contractor slammed his truck door hard enough to make several people turn. Victoria reached the cruiser before Briggs had fully stepped out. Deputy, I want him ordered to open that gate immediately. She held a thick HOA binder against her chest like it was a badge. Briggs adjusted his hat and looked toward the entrance. Morning, Mrs. Langford. This is not a good morning. He is interfering with residents, businesses, and scheduled services. I understand. No, I don't. Think you do. Her voice sharpened. This community owns permanent access. Briggs looked at me through the gatehouse window. Mr. Holloway? I stepped outside carrying a slim folder. The wind coming off the lake cut through my jacket and carried the smell of wet leaves across the road. I handed Briggs certified copies of the recorded agreement, the breach notice, delivery confirmations, and the map showing the Northern County route. Victoria immediately pushed her binder toward him. Our bylaws clearly establish HOA authority over all community entrances. Briggs accepted both sets of documents and walked back to his cruiser. For 12 minutes, nobody moved. He stood beneath the open rear door reading page by page while dozens of homeowners watched. The only sounds were idling engines, distant birds, and the occasional electronic chirp from someone still pressing a useless remote. Finally, Briggs closed both folders. Mrs. Langford, this is a civil property dispute. Victoria smiled as though she had won. Exactly. So make him restore access. That isn't what I said. Her expression changed. Briggs held up my documents. The recorded agreement identifies this entrance as privately owned infrastructure. The HOA's access is conditional, and the owner provided notice of suspension after an alleged material breach. Alleged? I almost smiled. That single word was the difference between a deputy and a judge. Briggs wasn't deciding the contract. He was explaining why he would not override it. Unless you have a court order requiring Mr. Holloway to open this gate, he continued. My office is not forcing entry onto private property. The crowd became completely silent. Victoria stepped closer. People are being locked out of their homes. No, ma'am. The Northern County Road remains open. It adds 18 miles. Yes. It can't handle large boat trailers. That may be inconvenient, but it is not unlawful detention. A gray-haired homeowner named Charles Brenner pushed through the crowd. Victoria, you told us the HOA owned this road. She turned toward him. This is complicated. You charged us a special assessment for gate improvements. Another resident lifted her phone. And you advertised private marina access to renters. The questions came faster after that. Why didn't the board pay the repair bill? Did we submit an insurance claim? Why weren't homeowners told about the breach notice? Victoria raised both hands. Everyone needs to calm down. Nobody did. Malcolm Price, the retired accountant from the board meeting, arrived in a dark pickup and parked near the front. He walked directly toward Victoria, holding a printed email. I asked the management company for the insurance file, he said. She stared at him. There isn't one. The crowd reacted like dry timber catching fire. You never reported the damage? Charles demanded. Victoria's jaw tightened. The claim was excessive. You didn't let the insurer decide that, Malcolm said. A furniture truck driver leaned from his window. I'm billing somebody for every hour I sit here. A wedding coordinator near the back shouted that 3 vendors had already canceled. A landscaping company announced it was leaving. One homeowner held up a rental cancellation notice showing a full refund and penalty charge. Every consequence landed in public. Visible. Measurable. Expensive. Victoria looked toward me as if I had created the disaster. I hadn't. I had only stopped paying to hide it. My attorney, Claire Donnelly, arrived at 7:18 carrying a settlement packet. She walked through the pedestrian side entrance, joined me beside the gatehouse, and looked across the growing crowd. The conditions are ready, she said quietly. I nodded. Victoria watched us. For the first time that morning, her anger gave way to something else. Uncertainty. Claire approached her and held out the packet. Full payment of the $63,500 repair invoice, emergency costs, legal fees, acknowledgement of ownership, and new written access terms. Victoria did not take it. That's extortion. Claire's expression never changed. No, it is an offer to cure the breach before the association's losses become larger. Behind Victoria, a homeowner spoke clearly. Take the offer. Then another. Sign it. By the time the third person said it, the entire crowd had stopped. Looking at the gate. They were looking at her. Victoria stood perfectly still for several long seconds, the settlement packet hanging loosely in her hand, as if it had suddenly become heavier than paper should ever feel. Around her, nobody spoke. The morning breeze carried the scent of damp pine, fresh asphalt, and lake water through the line of waiting vehicles. Engines continued idling, but even the impatient contractors had stopped shouting. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the woman who had promised she controlled Silver Creek. She slowly opened the packet. Claire Donnelly had organized every page with color-coded tabs. Repair invoice, emergency stabilization costs, attorney's fees, recorded ownership acknowledgement, future access agreement, updated maintenance provisions. At the very back sat the final page. A simple release confirming the HOA would withdraw every accusation that I had unlawfully interfered with community access. Victoria looked up. "This is impossible." Claire answered calmly. "No. It's the contract your association signed decades ago." Victoria flipped through the documents again, as though different answers might appear if she read them faster. Malcolm Price stepped beside her. "Let me see." She hesitated, then handed him the packet. Malcolm adjusted his glasses and quietly read every page. The retired accountant had spent 35 years auditing municipal budgets, and unlike most people standing there, he actually enjoyed reading legal documents. After several minutes, he lowered the papers. "He isn't bluffing." Nobody reacted. Then Malcolm continued. "We're already in breach." A murmur rolled through the crowd. The notice period expired this morning. Another silence. Longer this time. Charles Brenner folded his arms. "So we've been arguing over something we already lost." Malcolm nodded. "If these documents are accurate." "They are," Claire interrupted. "They're certified." Malcolm continued reading. "The HOA assumed responsibility for damages caused by HOA-sponsored events, contractors, guests, and residents." He looked directly at Victoria. "Why wasn't the insurance carrier notified?" She looked away. "We were still evaluating the claim." "Were you?" Malcolm asked quietly. "Or did you decide to ignore it?" Nobody defended her. One board member who had quietly arrived during the argument stepped forward. His name was Dennis Avery. "I never saw these engineering reports." Another board member frowned. "I didn't either." Claire opened a second folder. Each director was copied by certified mail. She placed postal delivery confirmations on the hood of Malcolm's truck. One by one, the signatures became visible. Dennis stared at his own name. "I never received this." Claire pointed to another line. "It was signed for by your office manager." His expression hardened. He slowly turned toward Victoria. "You told us there wasn't enough documentation." "There wasn't." Claire slid another stack of papers forward. 23 engineering photographs, licensed inspection reports, electrical assessments, structural calculations. Every page dated before the board meeting. Every page ignored. The realization spread through the homeowners with remarkable speed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a paperwork mistake. It was a decision. A deliberate one. Near the back of the line, the owner of the wedding venue walked over holding his phone. "My floor is canceled." Behind him, the catering manager raised another invoice. "My staff has been waiting here since 6. The moving company's supervisor stepped forward. "My contract charges by the hour." Another contractor added his own delayed service invoice to the growing stack resting on Malcolm's truck hood. Paper kept accumulating. Not angry letters. Bills. Real ones. Each representing another consequence of refusing to settle a $63,500 repair invoice the day before. Victoria watched the pile grow higher. For the first time since I had known her, she had no speech prepared. No slogan. No polished explanation. Only arithmetic. Malcolm closed the settlement packet. "We need an emergency executive session." Charles shook his head. "No." Everyone looked toward him. "We've had enough closed-door meetings." Several homeowners nodded. "Handle it right here." Another voice joined in. "We deserve to hear it." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Dennis finally spoke. "I move that the HOA accept the settlement immediately." A second board member raised her hand. "I second." Victoria stared at them in disbelief. "You can't vote out here." Dennis looked around at the dozens of homeowners surrounding the entrance. "I think we've hidden enough from them already." One by one, every remaining board member raised a hand. Even the 2 directors who had supported Victoria throughout the dispute. The vote was unanimous. Victoria lowered her eyes to the signature line. Without another argument. Without another excuse. She uncapped her pen. Then, beneath the quiet sound of wind moving through the pines and small waves touching the shore, she signed every page. The gate reopened at 9:46 that morning. Not because Victoria demanded it. Because the HOA's payment confirmation arrived, the ownership acknowledgement was signed, and the new access agreement had been executed in front of every board member and half the community. Owen stood beside the control panel while I entered the first authorized residential codes. The gate motor engaged with a low mechanical hum. The steel arms swung inward, and the line of waiting vehicles finally began moving. No cheering, no victory speech, just tires rolling across pavement the HOA had spent years pretending belonged to them. The first payment cleared before sunset. $63,500 for the documented repairs. Emergency stabilization costs followed the next morning. Legal fees arrived 2 days later. Claire called while I was inspecting the rebuilt retaining wall beneath a clear October sky. Fresh concrete filled the air with a clean mineral smell, mixing with wet cedar and the faint metallic bite of new conduit. Small waves tapped against the shoreline while my crew tightened the final stainless steel bolts into the replacement guardrail. Everything cleared, she said. And the ownership document? Recorded with the county this morning. That mattered more than the money. Money repaired broken infrastructure. The recorded acknowledgement repaired the truth. Every homeowner received a new remote directly from Holloway Infrastructure Services. Not through Victoria. Not through the HOA Management Office. Each resident signed a simple agreement recognizing the private entrance road, electronic gate, marina service lane, and utility corridor as Holloway property. Most signed without complaint. Some apologized. Charles Brenner shook my hand and admitted he had paid special assessments for gate improvements without ever asking where the money went. Malcolm Price asked the same question. That was when the board began reviewing Victoria's spending. The emergency HOA meeting took place the following Tuesday inside the clubhouse. I didn't attend, but the windows were open, and voices carried clearly across the water while I inspected the repaired drainage system. The vote to remove Victoria as president was unanimous. By noon, her name disappeared from the HOA website. By Friday, Malcolm had found several unauthorized event contracts, inflated vendor charges, and payments approved without competitive bids. Every questionable contract led back to companies Victoria had personally selected. The new board turned the records over to its attorney and insurance carrier. That investigation belonged to them. I had never needed to destroy Victoria. I only needed to stop protecting her from the consequences of her own decisions. She listed her lake house before winter. The moving truck arrived on a gray November morning, using the Northern County Road because Victoria refused to sign the new access agreement. It added 18 miles and crossed the narrow bridge she had once called unacceptable. I watched her white SUV follow the truck between the pine trees. She never looked toward me. I didn't wave. Some endings don't need applause. By December, Silver Creek Lake felt peaceful again. The retaining wall stood reinforced and dry. The electrical cabinet had been rebuilt with heavier protection. New fiber lines restored every security camera. The drainage channels carried stormwater exactly where the original engineering plans intended. Beside the keypad, I mounted a simple cedar sign. Holloway Private Access. Authorized use by agreement. Nothing dramatic. Just accurate. One evening, I stood near the gate holding my father's old tape measure. The sky burned orange above the frozen lake, and the cold wind carried the smell of pine across the road. Ice knocked softly against the timber pilings with the same hollow rhythm I remembered from childhood. Measure twice. Build once. Fix it before someone notices it's broken. Victoria believed ownership was whatever people could be persuaded to accept. My father taught me something different. Ownership meant responsibility. Responsibility meant records. And records meant no amount of arrogance could rewrite the truth forever. Justice didn't arrive with shouting. It didn't need revenge. It waited quietly behind a locked gate until everyone finally understood who had earned the right to open it.